Hey friends, we're in the Dockland area of London, England for Book by Book, bit of Bible study. Let's get those Bibles out. If you haven't got one, okay, but we've got Bibles here, and what we're doing is the second book of Samuel in the Old Testament. Share with us in study number 4, if you would, and we'll do our very best here where we are, right by the water. The hearts of the people are with Absalom. So we're in the story here of David and the coup by Absalom. We're looking at 2 Samuel chapter 13 right through to 16, verse 14. And I'm going to start by just reading actually a little bit further on, if I may, in chapter 15. Let's have a look here. Chapter 15, verse 10. This is about the coup. Then Absalom sent secret messages throughout the tribes of Israel. As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, Absalom is king in Hebron. 200 men from Jerusalem had accompanied Absalom. They had been invited as guests and went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, to come from Gilo, his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength. These are actually among, I think you'd agree, the most distressing pages almost of the whole Bible. The kitchen sink drama of Absalom begins here in chapter 13, a bit further back, with David's son Amnon, I'm afraid, designing to violate his half-sister Tamar by a subtle plan for her to be looking after him while he pretended to be ill. What does this tell us about our own deceitful desires, friends?
Oh, it's so dangerous, and we've already thought about the way that David had already been, that he'd sown the seeds of not being sufficiently discipled and controlled about this in his own life, and how 2 Samuel 5:13, after he left Hebron, David took more concubines and wives, and then, so that little boy, Amnon, grew up when his dad only had 2 wives, and he's seen that happen, and all that go on, and he's sort of thought, oh, Dad's got away with all this. And then he's got to a stage where, well, because our children listen to our actions and lifestyle more than our words. So maybe David said, listen, you've got to be holy to the Lord and be really controlled about this. And Amnon's like, but you're not. And he's seen that, and then he's got himself into a mindset that probably thought, hey, I'm the king's son. I have desires. And if I'm going to be fulfilled, I need to fulfill my desires. That is a mentality that we can get into. And then once you think that, you can never be satisfied. And that's why our desires are called deceitful in Scripture, because they promise that we'll be happy, we'll be fulfilled if we indulge them. They're deceitful desires, and they're dangerous and killers. And the thing is, we've got to be able to go, no. The Lord Jesus teaches us to say no to those deceitful desires and give us a totally different way of living. No, put them to death. That's why his way is like, come, take up the cross. We've got to kill that old nature with its deceitful desires and have a new one that cares for people rather than using them and all that goes with that. So it's really, as we've seen, that collision between 2 incredibly different mindsets. The mindset of the world, which is self-centered, the mindset of Christ, which is self-sacrificial. And actually, you might say, oh, but this is just a little thing. No, there is no little sin. The tiniest one can kill the whole world. One tiny sin led to all the sin. One sin. So we cannot indulge even one thing with impunity.
So this terrible action by Amnon in chapter 13, then it goes on. When Tamar tries to regularize what's happened, by a sort of form of marriage. Can you help us on this, Nancy?
Yeah, she says to him, don't do this, my brother. Don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. But she also says, you could speak to the king and he will not keep me from being married to you. And that hits us kind of strange because we think, why would she suggest being married to this one who is wanting to rape her? Well, I think perhaps in some way she's trying to put him off. She's dealing with a man who is out of his mind with lust. Right? Yeah. And the law that he shouldn't do this with his sister, that means nothing to him at this point. And, she's suggesting that, there is a way to could do this with dignity, to provide her with a life of dignity and not rob her of her innocence in this ugly way.
Yeah.
What would you say, Paul?
No, that's right, because those laws that about, or if a woman has been raped, and sometimes they say, well, the man could marry her in the law, and sometimes people go, that's horrendous, like, what? That's even making it worse. No, it's not got anything really to do with compelling her to be intimate with the guy. It's giving her honor and an inheritance and a name and provision for the children. The Bible's really, those laws are about social justice and economic justice. And sometimes people read them and try to bring a very modern view where marriage is, if it exists at all, it's only to do with sexual intimacy, into a Bible world where it's really trying to resist all that. And she's certainly trying to resist that from this guy who's out of control.
Oh, you see, here we are seated in the very peaceful surroundings of London, Dockland area with Paul Black and my colleague and Nancy Guthrie from Nashville in Tennessee, just sharing together in a bit of Bible study. But this is actually horrendous, what we're learning. I mean, at a time of sheep shearing, also we learn, Absalom, in his fury at Amnon's actions, puts on a party. And there has Amnon killed. So why did Absalom, the half-brother of Amnon, take justice into his own hands like this?
No, it's true, because Absalom, and he can see that there's that issue about justice, social justice, this is wrong what's happened. And the law said, really, Amnon should have been executed for this. But they totally should have been. Absolutely outrageous. And then there's Tamar, and she has to bear the full weight of this crime on herself. And she sort of ends up living in shame, hidden away. And Amnon, he's just like, yeah, whatever, I'll get on with life. And then Absalom's like, no, that's my sister, you can't do that. And nothing's being done about it. And justice is when the weight that's fallen on the victim is in some way transferred to the perpetrator. That's what justice is to do with. And at the moment, he says, all of that's just sitting on my sister. And Amnon's not carrying any of this. So Absalom's like, he's crying out for justice. But it's so important, like Deuteronomy 32:35, the Lord says, look, vengeance is mine. Leave justice in my hands. And you might say, but it's not happening. Do we trust him that eventually, either now or then, on the day of justice, but do we believe that he will deliver justice? And that is a hard thing sometimes, because in this life we might not see it, and Absalom can't see it. But he doesn't, I think, trust that the Lord will bring justice. So in the end, he says, no, I don't think the Lord is going to do any justice in the end, not even on that day of justice. I got to do justice. The moment we do that, terrible things happen.
The Bible is so realistic. It brings us these terrible events, and we have to see our own world, I'm afraid, in the light of this as well, I'm sorry to say. Actually, as we go on, I mean, in chapter 14, Absalom then has to flee for his life. And what should David, do you think, have done in the light of all, well, chapter 14, with the impassioned visit of the woman from Tekoa and all of that? Would you like to speak to that for a moment, Nancy? This would be a help.
Well, in terms of what he should have done, first of all, you said earlier he should have been the husband of one wife.
Yeah.
Long ago, because we know that we're seeing the consequences. He should have protected his daughter in this household, where he had to have known the character of his sons and about their lustful intentions. But most significantly, it just seems like he doesn't deal with his sons. There are no consequences. It does say he's furious about it, but that doesn't seem so. Yeah. So he's really mad, but he seems to do nothing. So he should have guarded even his own integrity of that. And he is the Lord's king, and as the Lord's king, he should be doing justice and righteousness. That should be the description of the Lord's king, and he seems to have failed on both accounts. And ultimately, he's showing us that we need a greater king. We need a greater king, one who will not inherit his father's flaws and failures. And I think also, though, we are also seeing a pattern here, aren't we? This is not the first time. We saw in 1 Samuel a leader, Eli, who has these wicked sons. We see later Samuel,
Yeah.
his sons are worthless, right? So we're certainly seeing a pattern here that I think falls into line with his sons.
And then comes the coup. And chapter 15 tells it begins the 4-year account of Absalom's coup, popularizing himself, as we read earlier, with the people, verses 1 to 6. And then, the message comes to David from his advisors in verse 13. The messenger came and told David, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. Why this drawn-out story of the king's flight across the Kidron Valley, verse 23 onwards?
It's such a long story, and you think, all right, he's got to go. And yet, whenever the Bible does things like that, we're like, hang on. Like, the Lord doesn't go into all these details for nothing. And you suddenly think, here's the anointed king. He's rejected by his people. And there's like rebellion against him, and he's in Jerusalem, and he has to go outside Jerusalem. And there's that Kidron Valley, which is a place of rubbish. Kidron, it's like murky. It means like murky. It's a place of rubbish. So he goes down into this dark valley of rubbish and becomes later a place of like sacrifice and things like pagan worship. And he goes through that and up the Mount of Olives, and then we're like, whoa, hang on, that's like what Jesus does, goes through the Kidron Valley and up the Mount of Olives when he's rejected and has to leave Jerusalem. What? And you suddenly realize there's something like really big going on here, and that we're being shown this big picture thing. This isn't just about David. None of these things are just a personal soap opera. It's about something. And that David, like, takes, he's been rejected and all these things, but he can't, like, fix it in that big way. He's not the king that can really bring justice and really establish the kingdom. But he's some way we're being shown, whoa, there will be a king who will walk almost in the exact footsteps of David. I heard a sermon where someone said, I wonder if David, when it was happening, as John describes it, David's looking down like, oh, that's exactly what I did. I wonder if that's true.
Oh boy, do you want to add to that at all? I mean, it's incredible what we're reading right now. The Kidron Valley, chapter 16. And then why doesn't the fleeing David respond to the curses of this man Shimei? That's in verses 5 to 14. What is that about? Can you?
Well, as he's
Nancy.
fleeing, there's really this series of 6 encounters he has with various people. Yeah. It begins back in chapter 15, beginning in 19. There's Ittai, the Gittite. He's in exile, and he actually kind of blesses him. He says, may kindness, faithfulness be with you. He's kind of a model disciple. There's Zadok. We go on then in chapter 32, Hushai the Archite. And he seems to be David's friend. Early on in chapter 16, Ziba, who's the steward of Mephibosheth, but he lies to David. And then we come to this one you've asked about, Shammai. As David is approaching this area where he is, this is the clan of Saul's family. I mean, so it's been a while that David's been king, but there are still Saul loyalists. And this guy he is convinced, all the way along when we study 1 Samuel, we keep seeing that David refuses to be any part of Saul's death. Yet this guy still wants to nail him for it. He calls him, he curses him. He's really a scoundrel, but he says to him, you have come to ruin because you are a man of blood, in verse 8. And of course we know in regard to Saul, he's not a man of blood, but we also know in regard to Uriah the Hittite, which is not what Shemaiah is talking about, he is a man of blood. But what's so interesting is the way David responds to him. He responds to him, even though he must have heard when he said man of blood, he must have heard, was there a flinch inside him? Yeah. He thought of Uriah's murder, and he must think, in a sense, I am a man of blood. And yet his response is that he is, in a sense, he's innocent, that the Lord is going to repay me with good. I think here, clearly, David has taken hold of the gospel. He's taken hold of the gospel that though he is not blameless, he has been made blameless by the blood of Christ. And that Christ, when he cried out to God to cleanse him of sin, he says, dip that bit of hyssop in that blood that I don't know about, but that you know about. David has by faith embraced the gospel that he has been cleansed by the blood of Christ for the great wrongs he has done. And so he expects good from God instead of to be cursed. He expects blessing.
And it is like that he is innocent of the things, these false accusations that are thrown on him. And he's cursed with false accusations, and he's the anointed one. In that very way, that's what Christ would be. The curse placed on him and things that he hadn't done. In a way, exactly what you're saying.
Though he was innocent.
Yeah, though he was innocent of those specific things. And he trusts himself into the hands of the Lord. Brilliant.
David was a man of prayer. And every now and then his heart lifts to God. Actually, as it does in Psalm 61, where after the coup from Absalom, here he is far away now. Hear my cry, O God. Listen to my prayer. Verse 2, from the ends of the earth I call to you. I call as my heart grows faint. Even the faintest prayer can be heard by heaven. And I wonder, would you like me to tell you the story of Billy Graham's cat?
Okay.
Billy and Ruth Graham had a cat in their home in North Carolina. And the cat ruled the household. And one day it gave birth to a litter of kittens. And she placed the litter on the spare room bed. Mr. and Mrs. Graham thought that was not the best place to have them, so they moved the kittens into a cardboard box, safely kind of insulated, put it in the kitchen to keep them warm. The cat, however, decided to reverse that procedure and brought them all back to the spare room bed, though inadvertently left the smallest kitten of all back in the box. Mr. and Mrs. Graham sat on the stairs to watch what happened. Finally, that little kitten let out the tiniest little noise. Instantly, the mother cat bounded in from 3 doors away, seized the little cat in her jaws and brought it back to join the others. She had heard. And Ruth Graham said, that is a picture of the way in which the Lord hears our feeblest, faintest prayers. And she quoted John Tripp, who is a famous Puritan writer, where he said, yea, he can feel breath when no voice can be heard for faintness. Now, is that you? Is that me? When our prayers are so feeble, he hears. Believe it, believe it, believe it. We'll do another study before long.